Hello and welcome to another Ammach Project Archives episode. And we are with the last speaker, who is Sarah Goodley. This is just over 20 odd minutes or so. And Sarah is speaking to us from a health practitioner's point of view. She has an MA. She's been very much involved in healthcare. And I had hoped to do some work with her back in the early days with Ammach on child support, child experiencer support, and that may indeed come about. I don't know, would come about with her, but I'm certainly looking into maybe progressing that idea, because most experiencers do recall as adults that they had experiences as a child. And where do children go to report their experiences? They're often not believed, dismissed, dreamers or liars or worse. So that may be something in the future once I get a bit more window of time. It just didn't manage to happen under the umbrella of the Ammach project. But watch this space. And in the meantime, Sarah Goodley has some very interesting things to say about the connection with children, and very, very pertinent for today. So enjoy this short piece as an end to 2013 Ammach conference. Anyway, I'd like to welcome Sarah, who's going to talk for about 20 minutes, half an hour.
Okay, the presentation this afternoon is on the importance of supporting childhood experiences. First of all, what I'd like to do is explain, seeing as I'm not an experiencer myself, or to my knowledge I'm not an experiencer myself, I'd like to explain to a bit about why I'm interested and the situations that have happened in my experience that have overlapped slightly and brought me into what's happening with people who are experiencing this phenomena. So this is my matrilineal line, and what's happened in my matrilineal line. I was actually brought up by my grandmother, and not too unusual, you'd think. It happened quite a lot in the 60s and what have you. My mother was Jean, and she became pregnant when she was 17, and I was adopted by my grandmother. What was unusual, what we found out more recently, is that this phenomena has happened for the past 5 generations that we know of. So when you're looking at the transgenerational stuff and family patterns, I think that's something to look into. That this has gone on for as many as 5 generations and beyond, maybe, but definitely 5 that we know of. The other thing that Kate and I have always said is that we are here, this sort of incarnation, if you like, is to break the cycles. And I thoroughly think that that is what we're here to do. And it's interesting that both my daughters and my eldest daughter spent a lot of time being brought up by my mother, my real mother, and she actually went to live with her when she was 13. So it's gone on even on this generation. But since then, both my daughter Emma and my daughter Hannah have given birth to daughters who have both been stillborn. I think we do think that this is probably a way of going, actually, enough's enough on this. That's it, we're going to break this cycle. So that's what's happening. And I think breaking the cycle of what's going on and raising awareness of what's going on, because whenever you can go, enough's enough, this is what's happening, and it can be honest and a truthful discussion, then things can change. And until that's what needs to happen. On the other side, this was my real father. Now, quite an unusual story here. If the picture's on your right, was when he was younger. The one on the extreme right was when he was probably fathering me. He was quite an unusual character. He was actually born in Nottingham during the war, and when he was 3, he was adopted out to Mablethorpe. He had diphtheria, was slightly deaf. Seemed to have quite a sort of extra human abilities, really. And I've got press cuttings. He was on the lifeboat and he was a lifeguard in Mablethorpe during the 60s and 70s. And I've got press cuttings of the sort of heroic things that he did. And he saved a couple of children, one of which he revived. He fell in the sort of run, he ran off, he sort of revived him at a time when he didn't really get people back. And he seemed to be able to have quite unusual abilities. And it's interesting that he ended up in the mental health system from the age of 30 to the age of 64 when he died. And every year, a family from the East Midlands used to send a Christmas card because he'd saved their son. And that carried on till he died. I didn't really have a lot to do with him. I was always kept from him because he was a bit of a dangerous character. Although, again, he was a sort of he used to swim out. He used to go into the North Sea and swim out to the 2 Mile Buoy, spend 10 minutes having a rest, and then swim back. Now, anyone that's been in our North Sea knows that you have to be pretty unusual character to do something as a stunt like that you do on a regular basis. On the picture on the right is actually of my father and Kate's father together. So, the left. Yeah, I'm not very good, I'm dyslexic, I'm not very good with my left and my right, so you'll have to bear with me. That was a picture in 2008, shortly before he died. Now, he became a paranoid schizophrenic, and at the age of 30, he was incarcerated after attacking somebody in Grimsby, and he remained incarcerated for 34 years, and anybody that's looked at the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest will have some idea of what he went through. What I noticed now is I sort of got to know him later on in my life, and it was quite a joke. I'd already lost 2 dads, if you like. I'd lost my granddad in 2002, and before that we'd lost Kate's dad, who was sort of my stepdad, in 2001. So when the social worker phoned up shortly after this and said, we need you to get in touch, and your dad is sort of the end of his life and kept coming to the end of his life, etc., I made the joke that it was a good job I worked through myself, because if I was having to have time off to visit my 3rd dad's funeral, then they think I was a bit of a lying cow. But what's interesting, though, it was quite late when he ended up in the mental health system. Now, some say that it was when somebody put an LSD tablet in his drink, and it was a bit of a joke, and he never really recovered from this and seemed to change quite drastically after that. I wonder, with the knowledge that I've got now, whether he had some sort of walk-in on that experience. And the more I'm looking into the 4th dimensional stuff and the esoteric stuff then, and the more I know about other people's experiences when they've had eruptions. But I don't think, from what I can understand, that medicating him and electric shock treating him did him any favours. And when you look in other cultures, how people with experiences are treated. We've got a friend who lives in Turkey, and he says that if anybody starts developing any experiences, they're helped and supported through it. They're not drugged, they're not electric shocked. And of course, if you look from a shamanistic perspective, anybody experiencing unusual experiences are considered to be gifted, and they're helped through the demonic stage to get to a stage where the information that they've got for the tribe is useful to the tribe. And so I think listening to the children and listening to people with unusual experiences, even dementia, I've been looking into dementia quite a lot, and even people suffering from dementia have information for us. So I think the more we listen to people who, whether they seem to be crazy or whether they're having some sort of experience and they're receiving some sort of information, and so we need to be listening. How I've come into this is a bit through the natural health, a bit through education, a bit through the mental health with the counselling. What I'm noticing is that children everywhere need support. All our children need support, including those with anomalous experiences. So what is important to children, all children, is to be born and have some sort of secure base. Now, if the original secure base is the mother's bond, the mother's love, the eye contact between the eyes and the breast, that is what the original secure base. It's food, it's love, it's nurture and warmth. And later on, When they've got that and they're surviving, they need the action, adventure, excite and explore, which is all part of the attachment theory. Also, children need freedom of expression. One of the worst things that we can do to children is not believe them. It's quite interesting. My little nephew, he's sort of making up stories at the moment in his own little mind about things that we know haven't ever happened. It's not like he's having anomalous experiences. It's that he's just fantasising a solution that he would like to make things right in his life. But even that needs listening to, rather than telling them off and saying, no, that's wrong, that didn't happen, but actually asking them and carrying them through that. Even if it's an imagined experience, it's still an important experience to get some resolution for what's going on in their life and their psyche. And through art, through dance, through drama, through whatever, the freedom of expression is important. And what I'm noticing through being involved in the education system, I was a chair of governors at a local school for quite a while, and there's less and less time for these experiences, and it's more and more about indoctrinating of information. So children aren't able to have this freedom of expression to explore what's going in themselves and what their experiences are. Children need to be able to process their experience. They need to be able to talk about their experience. They need to be able to have other people with shared experiences. And most of all, they need to be believed. I think one of the cruelest things for any children, but especially children who are having anomalous experiences, is that they're not believed. Imagine that if you were taken from your bed, abducted, abused, experimented on, and you know that would happen to you and no one believed you. Imagine, some of you imagine, no, you don't have to imagine, it's happened. Some of you in this room. For anyone not to be believed, even if they're making it up, even if, which I know people aren't, but even if they are, then they still need to be understood, and they still need to be not put in a box and not pigeonholed, and to work through that experience, whatever the experience and wherever that experience is happening. Also, children need to help to cope with duality. So especially, it can be as simple in these days as having to cope with living with one parent at a weekend and other parents during the week. So, but children need help to cope with that. We're having to cope with duality in the workplace all the time between what we know is right in our hearts and what's going on, because a lot of us working in organisations at the moment, whether it be national health, whether it be education, we know what's going on is totally wrong, and we're having to cope with that duality, working from head and heart, and fear, because we're being controlled with money, and if you don't do what we want you to do, then you're out on your ear, basically. But especially children who are experiencers, they've got to haven't got to go into school because you can home educate, but if they're in a school environment, they're in an environment where people are not having the same experiences as they are, and they have to find help in coping with that duality. Acceptance of enhanced awareness as well, accepting that you've got a difference, accepting that you've got a bit more than other people have got and a bit more understanding than other people have got. In a lot of cases, we have a situation, you've got an enhanced awareness that your teachers haven't got. And that can be very, very difficult when you know something about a subject more than your teachers are telling you, and when it presses people's thick buttons especially. A place to be who they are as well, that's what a children need, wherever that is. A place to be their own true potential is very important for children, all children, but again, especially for those with anomalous experiences. So the idea of how we could support children, we've come up with the idea of having a workshop for child experiences and their parents. I think it will be important at the first place to meet up with the parents and what have you, but with time and a bit of building up a bit of an attachment, probably giving those children time to be alone together with supervision, to just find out what happens and just see what occurs. And talking to some of the experiencers, they've actually said to me that having time with other people who were experiencing the same thing would have been a really good thing for them. Eclectic methods of curious inquiry. finding out, that means finding out through whatever method is appropriate for that particular person or that particular group of people to actually get out of them what's going on as well. Not in a way of extracting information to use it against them either, which is what can happen. So it's a case of getting that information in a gentle way, and it should be sort of a feedback loop that you get the information, process it, then you're able to help the next generation or those children a bit further to cope with what their experiences. Identification from this of further support. Who else can be brought in to help with this, what's going on? What more information do we need? What more information is going to be available that we can use? Also, Skype support between workshops is very important. To have some point of contact where people, parents especially if they're worried, to have something that isn't going to be in a mental health system that's going to be drugging them, making the life even more difficult. And continuing gathering of evidence and support, because the more evidence that we gain, the more people have got to take us seriously and the more support can be given, and it should be a perpetuation. So let's look at the potential factors influencing children, and this is all children, and I firmly believe that our children today are under attack. And what seems to be happening from what I understand of the situation is we seem to be having two streams. One stream seems to be the enhancement, or if you like, I don't even know if you call it an enhancement, but a medication and a change in our genetics, etc., from a false point of view. And the other thing seems to be an enhancement in that we're helping us to reach our own true potential. And I think that's the two lines that are coming in at the moment. So the potential factors that are influencing the sort of more negative aspect of a more robotic nature will be some of the epigenetics that's coming in at the moment. If anyone's not heard of epigenetics, it's David Wilcock does quite a lot of work on this, so it's worth looking at his work. But everything that the ancestors think, feel, eat, experience goes into the next generation. So we're missing a big trick as well by isolating grandparents away from their children, because we're missing a big chunk of wisdom to put into the next generation before they breed. So if we're having children that are being brought up by the state, in effect, then that wisdom is not being passed down, and we exist for more than our breeding time because we need to be here to help our grandchildren. Also, everything that we're being targeted with is going into our next generation. You think of the chemicals that we're all being exposed to. That's all affecting our next generation. Blood groups. I'm involved with supporting a group of parents who have had their children stolen by the state. It was interesting. It's not scientific, but I think it's very interesting that at a conference in Skegness, they were asked what blood group their children were, and over 50% in that room the children were rhesus negative. And what was happening was that sometimes the children who were being taken by the state, all the children were taken. The ones who were rhesus positive were brought back. The ones that were rhesus negative were kept. And I just think it's unusual, and I think that needs investigating, especially when it's only 17% of the nation, on average, is rhesus negative. So I think it's very strange that it was over 50%. And that what those parents were reporting was that they were having a lot more blood tests in hospital, and the children were often whisked off very early for blood tests saying that they got low blood sugar and blah, 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 Scooby and things like that. So there's something needs looking at along those lines. The polypharmaceuticals, massive assault on our children. It's not just chemtrails, it's all the drugs, all the things that put in our food and the vaccines, everything that you can think of that's artificial in our world that's going into our children from before birth and the generations before as regards the epigenetics. If you want to know more information on the polypharmaceuticals, Dr. Emma LeBeau is a good resource for that. Also, Dr. Jane Donegan, who's got phenomenal. She says she's not anti-vaccine, she's pro-child health, and she gives a very good argument about helping children through illness without vaccination. Christina England does some fantastic work on this, and they've done a lot of work to prove that shaken baby syndrome is actually vaccine damage. And so think how many parents are in prison for that. So attachments and relationships to others. Now it's really interesting that the more we're going down this line, the more the attachments, and Kate's going to talk in a bit about this, but the more the attachments are being broken between parents and their children. The earlier that we're getting children into school, the more these attachments have been broken. The more the state's taking control over parenting, the more that the attachment's being broken. And the less positive epigenetics from parents are being passed on, and the wisdom's being passed on. Environmental factors as well, from TV, you name it, chemtrails, fluoride especially, biggie, MSG, aspartame, one of my big bugbears, but also physical environment. If you think as well, the environment of abductees as well, who have been taken and everything, that's massive. And their experiences, whatever experiences children have, why are we labelling it as mental illness? It's an experience. It's something that needs to be taught through and helped through. And why are we compartmentalising children and drugging them, and the Ritalins and the what have you? Help children through these experiences and give them a good run round on the beach or wherever you park or what have you. That's what's needed. And stop drugging children and stop putting chemicals in them and making this happen in the first place. So what I'd like to do now is that the last part of this will be to talk about birth. It's very, very important. And when we talk about birth, we're talking about the perinatal period, really. So the Chinese philosophy is that a child is a year old when they're born. And when you look at the epigenetics, there's actually you can look at further than that. But from 3 months before conception is a really important time. Everything that the parents think, feel, experience at the time of conception is very important. You look at Chinese medicine, that's brought in. But also how a mother's thinking and feeling and experiencing right the way through their pregnancy. A lot of dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD can be through chemicals or high stress during early pregnancy, and so the fetal reflexes aren't peaking, inhibiting and going off. So that's all important. The transgenerational aspect is really, really important, and the patterns that we were talking about earlier. So I'd like to end there on the importance of birth.